Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine, and our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio. Hello again, everybody, and thank you for joining Kim and I today on The Wonderful World of Wine. How are you, Kim?
I'm good. How are you?
Everything is just great. Once
Wonderful.
again, we have a couple of topics we want to talk to our listeners about. And the first one I sent to you, kind of wanted to follow up. Recently, we had a conversation about the Coravin as a wine
hmm
gadget and some things that were going on with Coravin. And then just saw an article in VinePair. It was called The Good, the Bad, and the Downright Unnecessary Wine Gadgets. And I was thinking to myself, I have to talk to Kim and our listeners about this because after the Corvin episode, I have gadgets, and you know I'm a gadget freak here with the wine gadgets, Kim, and I really don't use a lot of them. So I thought it'd be good to follow up on this article and let's talk about gadgets and what we have and if they're necessary or not and why maybe we don't use them.
As soon
Did
as
you?
I saw this topic, I was like, oh, it's Mark the Gadget Guy. And I couldn't wait to get your perspective on having numerous things in your kitchen. Did you ever watch Good Eats with Altenberg Food
I
Channel?
watched a few of them. Yeah. Yeah.
So he had this whole sort of philosophy around things that only had a single use in the kitchen. And he said that the only monotasker you should have is your fire extinguisher, and that everything else should have multiple purposes. And I kind of feel that way about wine gadgets. There are a lot of things that you might you might buy them and they look really cool, but you can only use them in a certain situation and then they just take up space in your drawer. And it's the same for a lot of cooking tools. It's like they have one purpose and one purpose only, and then they just take up space. And what I kept coming back to with this VinePair article was that the things that they were talking about really do have not necessarily a lot of uses, but they are useful all the time, especially for those of us that either work in the wine industry or are regular consumers of wine. So this really spoke to me as sort of a let's simplify, but let's also get the most bang for our buck and for our kitchen and counter space out of these tools.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned kitchen counter space because originally when I get a gadget, it goes on the counter because I'm going to use it all the time. Or then it goes in a drawer and then it just goes down my cellar and never to
It
be
all ends
found
up
again.
downstairs, doesn't it?
Yeah. So first, we'll start out with the article. They mentioned what they call wine tool heroes, things that you should really be using for gadgets. And of course, the first thing they mentioned was the waiter's corkscrew, which is the number one thing I use all the time. And I'm sure the same with you, Kim.
Absolutely. I have a number at home, and then I have favorites that I either keep with me or that I keep at the school, because just like everybody sort of has a favorite fork or a favorite spoon at home, we tend to have our favorite corkscrews. And I really liked in this article where they mentioned that this particular style of corkscrew is beloved by people who are in wine as a profession and have been for over 100 years. But for casual wine drinkers, it's something that comes across as a little intimidating. And I feel like I need to do video tutorial on using this particular type of corkscrew, because once you use it a couple of times, you never go back. You never go back to a different style. It is the easiest thing. And if you have a good one, it's super smooth and it works all the time.
And they do have the knife on that waiter's corkscrew to cut
hmm
the foil. And there's all different styles. There's curved knives and longer knives, but it is used by most of the professionals. I was thinking of opening a gadget you see a lot is the foil cutter, where you
hmm
wrap around the top and to take the foil off. And I have a few of those and I don't use them. What about you, Kim?
My favorite corkscrew is it's 20 years old. I got it when I was in Italy on my honeymoon, and it has a foil cutter attached to the corkscrew. So I feel like I'm a little unusual because my favorite corkscrew is generally a little bit longer than most of those waiter's corkscrews because it has the foil cutter attached to it. But I just love it, and it is very reliable, and it's still sharp, and it still works really, really well. But I have to say, I haven't found too many makes of that particular style of corkscrew with the whole like square foil cutter built into it that work particularly well. So I think I just got particularly lucky with getting this corkscrew from this particular winery that I visited when I was in Italy. So that's my favorite,
Yeah, I've
but
never
I
seen
also
that.
have,
I've never seen that. So leave it to the
yeah.
Italians to come up with
Yeah,
that
it was
invention. Does it
really,
have a knife
really
too?
good. It does not have a knife. It's just
Wow.
the
Interesting.
foil cutter square. But everything else that I have that is my like really well-built, sturdy, good knife corkscrews are the style that you are talking about. So for our listeners who maybe don't have an idea or an image in your head about, you know, the kind of corkscrew that we're talking about, it's whatever you would see in the hand of your waiter when you go to a restaurant and you order a bottle of wine. So it's about 6 inches long. It's got the worm, so it's got the spiral cork opener on one side. It's got a little lever, and then it's got this tiny little knife that Mark is talking about, which is what you use to just cut off the foil capsule and you just lever up the cork. It's a very simple design, and it's still the best thing out there.
Have the waist corkscrew on my shelf for sale, and I also have the wings, the corkscrew with the wings
Should
that
we
you
get back to the wings at the
as you
end?
screw
Because
it in,
they spend a lot of
the
time
wings
talking
go.
about the wings in this article.
Yeah, no, it's just another style that I something I have that I don't use. And why I wanted to bring it up now. And
Yeah.
I also bought like there's all these expensive countertop openers, the rabbits, be their electric openers. I have all of those,
Hmm.
and I never use them. The electric one, you put it on, and it electrically goes into the cork and pulls it out. I'm sure you probably have some of those too, but I use none of those. But I
Yeah,
have them all.
I feel between the rabbit and the electric ones, those ended up being pretty fatty. They were popular for 5 or 10 years, and they were on kind of everybody's what do you get your wine drinking friend who has everything kind of Christmas lists. And I think they've sort of fallen out of fashion. I don't know. And it might just come down to that they're bulky and they take up a lot of space.
Yeah,
And when
counter
you have an
space.
alternative that is small and can just fit in a drawer, then why have this giant? I frankly have not seen a rabbit in a very long time. You still carry them in the store?
No,
You
no,
don't? Yeah, I
no.
haven't seen them in a while.
The rabbits were big, so they had to put in the drawer. The electric ones had to sit on the counter and charge up, and they were a little tall, so it just became more of a nuisance than a convenience to open a bottle of wine.
I think my in-laws have all of them. And my parents still have the wing corkscrews. Whenever I go over to any of their houses, I always, sneak in a couple of waiters' corkscrews, sneak them into the drawer so that when I
Yeah,
come over, I have a corkscrew to use.
I
Why don't we
always have.
tell our listeners about the issues with the winged corkscrew? Because that was the sort of the denouement of this article about thing that will ruin your cork opening a
Yeah,
bottle.
go ahead.
Yeah, so the winged corkscrews. So you know the kind that I'm talking about, listener, where you put it on top of your bottle and you twist the little thing on the top, and then the arms come up, so it almost looks like a little person.
Yes, the one you
And
see on jokes on the internet about
that's right. That's
exercising,
right.
right?
Oh,
Yeah,
that's right. When you're exercising by drinking wine, it's the up and
yep.
down and up and down. It's like you're doing jumping jacks. And when you look at the worm, so the actual corkscrew part of it, that screwy bit that goes into the cork, and you compare it to one of these waiter's corkscrews, they look very much the same. But the issue is that when one of these winged corkscrews goes into a cork, it kind of creates this hole or chasm through the middle of the cork. So you're pretty much destroying your cork as you're trying to take it out of the bottle. And if you are opening a bottle that has either a particularly delicate cork because it is an older bottle, or there is something else going on with it, chances are you're going to end up with just a mangled cork with lots of little pieces in your wine. Whereas a waiter's corkscrew kind of goes in between the cells of the cork structure. So it is able to hold that cork in place a little bit better as it takes it out of the bottle, and it doesn't mangle the thing to pieces. So that's one of the major issues with using the winged corkscrew. A lot of people have them as backup in their kitchens. One of the benefits for it is that it is easier to use if you don't necessarily have the arm strength. And I think that that's one of the things that that is keeping people from using a waiter's corkscrew when they look at it and they're like, oh, I'm not strong. There's no way that I'm going to be able to use this thing to get a cork out of a bottle. But I have to tell you, small people like me, and I am not a large woman and I'm not very strong, it's very, very easy to use a waiter's corkscrew. So it really doesn't take a whole lot of arm strength or upper body strength. So you really don't have to worry about relying on a winged corkscrew because you're afraid you're not strong enough to use a waiter's key. So I would say for anyone who has never done it before, I'm going to have to record a video about how to use one of those.
I think people are just
and you
afraid
can probably,
of those.
just go onto YouTube and
There'll be one.
search it. Yeah.
But
But they're
people
very
are-
easy to use.
They're afraid of that waiter's corkscrew because some of them have a couple of different levers on it to use for
Yeah, I think
leverage.
the lever's
And-
a big part of the issue, I think.
Yeah, but then the wing ones just seem so easy. It opens up, you push it down, it takes it out. So
Mhm.
so then the VinePair came. They moved on and said that one of the other wine tool heroes is a universal glass. Now I thought it was interesting glass as an accessory
I
because
thought that was interesting too.
yeah, I'm glad we're on the same page with that
Yeah.
because you really need a glass to drink it, but they're saying the same thing, to have stemmed glassware. We talked about this a lot where you can use special glasses for each type of wine. But for me, I use the same one all the time. I
Yeah.
don't know about you.
Well, I think if you look at your wine glass as a tool to enhance your appreciation of the wine, then yes, a wine glass fits in there. But I see what you mean. I mean, you need a corkscrew to open the bottle and you need a glass in order to pour your glass of wine. So in that respect, they're kind of on the same level. So I'm okay with this perspective. And I'm kind of like you. I used to have maybe a dozen different shapes of wine glasses all hanging in my kitchen. I had 2 glasses of each, so that whatever wine we had that particular night, I would have the just right wine glass for it. And over the last few years, we have been paring down too. So I'm kind of also coming around to this universal wine glass idea. And I've even started using one of my kind of universal quote unquote red wine glasses for my sparkling wines too. So I've sort of moved away from even my flutes for my champagne.
I like that.
Believe it or
Get
not.
down basic things.
Very
Well,
basic.
You
Yep.
know, we talked recently with our friend Len, and he had a million glasses, and he was testing. But it was more experimental, so I can see where people go with that.
Yeah.
Next on the VinePair article, they said things that are actually useful, and they did mention the Corvin, which we talked about. They mentioned the Durand opener, which is the super fancy bottle opener that has both the forks, I guess you would call it, and the threaded screw, so you
Yeah.
can kind of get it out more fancy. And then they also mentioned a decanter, which is very useful, which I have many decanters and I really don't use them at home a lot. I use them when we do classes to aerate special wines, but I really don't use them a lot at home. What about you, Kim?
We do use ours from time to time, and especially when I have younger wines that I would like to have some aeration. But honestly, I generally will just use them on holidays when I have those wines.
Yeah.
So, if I bring a nice bottle of, I don't know, Rioja home for Easter, and I know that it's on the younger side, but I really want it to go with that leg of lamb, I will decant it before we eat so that it will get some of that oxygen and will start opening up. So it's a little bit fruitier and a little bit less tight, and it will go better with the meal. But I think it is good to have a decanter because it serves a couple of purposes. If your wines are too young, you can decant them and they will open up. Or if your wines are on the older side, you can pour them off the sediment so that you have a cleaner pour. So if you are a fan of, say, Napa Valley Cabernets and you get some that have some age on them that will have some of that sediment in the bottom of the bottle, that's not something you want in your wine glass. So it's very nice to be able to pour that off into a separate vessel. And if you have a beautiful decanter, then that is very nice to be able to use, pour your wine into. But those are really the 2 situations where you want to have a decanter, whether your wines are really on the young side or really on the old side. I mean, you can always use them to kind of make a statement if you're having people over there and you're like, here's my decanter full of red wine, haha, this looks really pretty. But as far as a necessary tool, it's really just those 2 other situations that I find myself needing the decanter in.
And VinePair's final comment was that less is more. when it comes to gadgets. So that
Hmm.
was their final thing on the article. They talked a little bit about gadgets, and then they said less is more, which I totally agree with. And then I kind of made a list, Kim, of other gadgets I have around the house or that I bought for
I'm so glad
wine.
you did that because I'm
And
like, oh, I've got a couple more things in mind that I consider to be necessary wine tools slash gadgets to have around the house.
all right, so we'll go down our list that we have. I
Okay.
bought over the years different styles of like wine dispensers that you could keep on the counter and kind of tap wine and preserve it and serve it at the
Oh,
same time. I also had a wine dispenser that I served samples in the retail store. And over time, it phased them all out. I think the bigger ones in the retail store became an issue with always keeping them clean. It would go so fast. It was hard to, it was filling it all the time. It got to be a pain. At home, I think I drank it too fast, so it wasn't worth putting it on
so
the counter.
so what are these tools? Is this like a Coravin?
It's no, it's an actual like wine fridge station that has a tap in the gas that you put your
Oh,
bottle
the
in.
whole like a cabinet
Right.
almost.
Yeah, but it
Okay.
serves the wine, not a storage fridge,
Gotcha.
just an actual server. So you could pour wine out of it. You put the bottle in, it adds gas, and you pour it out.
That
And
that
there's all,
seems like it would take up an awful lot of counter space.
yeah, little space. So
Hmm.
that made it to the cellar very fast. And then we talked in the past about wine fridges. I bought multiple temperature controlled wine fridges over the
Okay.
year, and then they end up going from the kitchen to the dining room to the basement and just being used to store wine versus nice cosmetic thing in the eating
Okay.
area and stuff like
So
that.
storing as opposed to we're going to keep them in the kitchen so that our perfect bottle of wine is right there on hand
Yeah.
and ready whenever I need it.
Yeah, that was the
Gotcha.
original intent.
Yeah.
Right. And then wine preserving things like I bought the balloons that you put in the bottle, the air vacuum things with the stoppers.
Mr.
One, it
Gadget
was a
over here.
vacuum thing that electronically sucks the air out and seals it.
Yeah.
And I use none of those
Okay.
anymore. And then I bought wine thermometer.
I have a couple of those too. I think I've only gotten them as gifts though. I've never bought a wine thermometer for myself.
Never you. I don't think they had the ones where you could put the thermal stickers on the side of the
Oh
bottle.
my goodness. That's
Never.
just too much
Yeah,
work.
never used that. I
Oh.
bought a metal one that looked like an actual turkey thermometer. I've never done that. I mean, once again, we talked to our friend Len who measures all his temperatures.
Yeah.
They even have the infrared one. I never did that gadget, but
Well, I
yeah,
think also it depends on how much time and energy do you want to invest in your wine enjoyment journey. And, we keep referring back to Len because he, I'm sure, has these things and he takes the temperature and he does, a dozen bottles a night and he does comparisons and things like that. For a person like him, these are useful because he's going to use them all the time. He's going to actually put them into practice for having that increase his enjoyment of his wine. But I would say for the majority of people, this is not where they're at. And it's not where I'm at, and it's not where you're at. So it's very interesting to hear about all of these things that you have.
yeah. The last two things I had, Kim, were wine charms that you put on the
Oh, yeah.
glass. I mean, I know what glass is mine. I don't use those. I have them. I don't use them.
Don't you host
And
holidays? Come on.
well, if they don't know what glasses it is, I think it's just a gadget. It's really an accessory that's not needed, I don't feel. They look cute, but we don't
So
need them.
cute.
And then wine pourers. So they have the
Hmm.
little paper things you can fold up and put in the bottle to pour neatly, or the insert like a bartender pourer type of thing. I don't use those. We've poured so many wines now over time, you know how to pour it not to spill over time, I feel. So I don't use those anymore either. I think that was all I had for gadgets that
Okay.
I just don't use. Did you have anything I didn't mention that
Yes, I
yeah?
do.
Okay, let me hear it.
So at the wine school, we actually use those wine pourers all the time. So for our listeners who don't know what we're talking about, they're these little, they're thicker than foil, but they're foil circles. They're about probably 3 inches across, and you fold them up and you stick them in the neck of the bottle, and it helps you sort of direct the stream of the wine of your pour. And when you're pouring for 25 people in a room for doing big tasting. And especially for something like sparkling wine, where you can't put in a measured pourer because of the bubbles, actually, we find those very, very helpful. So I use those at work all the time, but I don't use them at home. So I think that that's what we are talking about, is something that you would have on hand in your home for your own personal enjoyment of wine. So as useful as those are in my professional setting, I don't use them at home. But nobody mentioned stoppers. And
Yes, yeah, good one.
that is one of my necessary go-to things that I always have at least a couple of in one of my kitchen drawers. And it's in the same little compartment that I keep my corkscrews in, whether it's my go-to corkscrew, or we didn't really talk about the pronged corkscrew. You mentioned it a little bit when we were talking about the Durand, which is kind of this hybrid corkscrew that has both these two prongs and then also a regular corkscrew worm. But I also have one of those little pronged things that does, it takes a little getting used to. And again, it's really only for if you regularly feel like you're going to experience a bottle that has a cork that's, a little bit kind of folly aparty or a little crumbly. But I keep those, and I keep my stoppers. And I keep stoppers for regular wine bottles and especially my sparkling wine stoppers. So because Mark loves to call me the bubbly queen, I absolutely need to have those things on hand for when I have an open bottle of sparkling wine and I'm not going to finish it. So yes, believe it or not, I don't always finish my bottle of champagne or my bottle of Prosecco. So I have oodles of champagne stoppers around my house, and I use them all the time. For anybody who regularly drinks sparkling wine, but even if you don't and somebody brings one over for you and say you're having, girls' night and you've got half a bottle left of Prosecco, you got to have some way to keep that bubble in there so that you can have your mimosas the next morning. So having a sparkling wine stopper, even just one of them, is really, really useful.
I understand the sparkling stopper. I use that all the time because you want to lock that down and capture, keep the bubbles in. Why don't you just use the cork instead of a stopper for regular wine?
So I usually do, but I every once in a while I will run across a cork that expands too much when it comes out of the bottle, and I just can't fit that thing back in the bottle at the end of the night. So I have a couple of just like pretty stoppers. They were what we gave out as little favors at our wedding. We gave out little wine stoppers. So we still have a couple of those kicking around, and over the years people have given me really just pretty ones that have like, I don't know, cats or flowers or something on them. So I keep a couple of those around just because every once in a while that cork just expands, or maybe you've gotten a bottle that has a plastic cork and so you really can't get it back in the bottle, or maybe the cork fell apart. I've got a bottle that the cork broke in half and I can't use it to restopper that wine. So it's just nice to have a couple of those things on hand when you really need them.
Yeah, to me, I just try to, over the years, I have all those stoppers. I just try to jam
back in.
Jam that cork in there. I don't
but
have
the
time
longer
to look
the
through
cork,
the drawer.
and, I mean, I know that like we have bags and bags of corks hanging around our house, right? But once those corks are no longer in the bottle for any length of time, even that little bit of expansion, you're not getting that thing back in a wine bottle. You're really not. So I have all of these bags of used corks, and I go through them. And I'm like, I can't use any of these.
Yeah.
Like they're just not going to restopper a bottle of wine.
Stoppers are a good one. I do have a lot of those, the ones which you can write on the tops and everything else. And yeah, most of the time I just put the cork back in when I can. But you're right. You're right on that.
So my other ones, quickly, you talked about wine charms. I have wine glass markers. They're little pens that will wash off with soap and water. So for if I'm having people over or it's a holiday or whatever, people will write their name on the foot of the glass, and then it just comes off with soap and water. So we don't need wine charms. You just literally have your name on your glass. So there's a couple of different brands out there, and they all work great. And I also use chiller sleeves that live in my freezer. So if I have a bottle of white wine or rosé that we're having for dinner, take my cold bottle of wine out of the fridge, and then I'll put this chiller sleeve over it so that when we bring it to the table, it'll stay nice and cold throughout the entire meal. Because it might take us a couple of hours to get through that bottle of wine. So it's nice to keep it at a good temperature. So I do keep some of those around. But I would say that those are my top gadgets, quote unquote, to have in my house. And I literally use them multiple times a week. So because they're useful for me, those are the things that I really wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the chiller. I can just see all the foam things and everything I have that I don't use anymore.
Yeah,
so.
see, for you, they're languishing in the freezer, but for me, I use them 3 times a week. So it depends on the person. So find your wine habits. And then I would say find these gadgets that work with your needs. So this is not like a be all and end all list, but these are the things that work for us. And it's all to work to make your life easier and to make your life better. You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Kim and Mark. You can find more information about Mark at franklinliquors.com and more information about myself at commonwealthwineschool.com. We are supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. All right, Mark, so we've just been talking about wine gadgets and things that you and I find useful around the house for our personal wine consumption. And I know that you had another article that we should talk about.
Yeah, it's something that popped up. And in the past, we talked about wine certifications, things that you see on labels. The bigger ones we talk about is all the time is organic, sustainable, biodynamic. But an article popped up recently. What is a Salmon-Safe vineyard? And there is actually a certification for Salmon-Safe. And I thought we'd just bring that up and maybe talk about a couple other things you may see on a label that have to do with these certifications that you have little stamps on the bottle, Kim. So
Right.
Salmon-Safe, what is your take on Salmon-Safe wines, Kim?
Yeah, so as I think this new generation of winemakers, grape growers is paying more attention to environmental issues and making sure that for the next however many years we are protecting the environment so that the next generation actually has a livable earth. We see a lot of these efforts being made to protect these areas that are specifically around vineyard sites and wineries from a lot of our winemakers and wineries out there. So this Salmon-Safe certification deals a lot with potential runoff from vineyards, from wineries into areas in the Pacific Northwest where salmon spawn. So they're making this concerted effort to make sure that they are not damaging the environment where the salmon need to live. So there are, I forget if the regulations are just about water runoff. I don't think they are. I think there's a number of protocols that they have to follow in order to be able to consider themselves one of these Salmon-Safe wineries. But it really goes into protecting the environment, protecting the wildlife, and specifically protecting the salmon and where they spawn and where they come back to every year. So I think that we're seeing more and more of these environmentally conscious kind of things on winery labels. And I think it's a good way to get the word out, but also kind of a little bit of a benefit to the wineries. Like if they're going to make the effort, then it makes sense to put it on the label so that people know that this is happening. And yeah, it might be a little bit of a marketing effort, but they should be rewarded for their efforts in trying to preserve some of these environments for the wildlife.
Yeah, wine producers they basically protecting the water quality that surrounds the
Yeah, so it's
vineyard.
mostly
The
it's mostly a
lakes,
water issue.
streams, yeah, rivers. It's all about like pesticide runoff, right? So I think there's like 350 vineyards that are in this, and it's in Northwest, like Washington, into Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And they just have like things where they plant trees, they grow cover crops, and they use more natural materials because they know the runoff can get in the water and it would affect the salmon. So
Yeah, I didn't know about the
that's a
tree
thing.
part. That was informative for me, that it's not just the water runoff, but there are these other things that they can do to protect the environment.
Yeah, it's big in Oregon and in Washington, that area. So, I mean, it's just something you might see a little fish thing on the label. I don't know if you use that. It brings back the whole sustainable conversation. Would you really care if the wine is sustainable? You care if they're protecting the fish? I don't know. It doesn't change the quality or what the wine's going to taste like. I mean, it's just their
Yep.
one form of sustainability.
But I think
Uh,
it's nice to let people know, what does that Salmon-Safe fish label mean when you
right,
see it on the label.
right.
Yeah.
So then there were just a couple other things we just want to refresh the listeners about that they'll see on a label. We always talk about organic, and the USDA in the US certifies true organic wines. But in France, you might see a label that says just AB, which is agriculture biologique. Is that how you say it, Kim?
Mm-hmm.
Biologique? That's a French organic.
That's their organic
This
labeling. Yep.
certification. Biodynamic is Demeter or Demeter. How do you say it, Kim?
Demeter.
Demeter, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a biodynamic certification. There is one for the California Wine Grower Alliance has one called Certified California Sustainability Wine Growing. They call it the CCSW. You might see that on a label that was established in 2010.
Yeah, they're putting a lot of emphasis on that one lately.
Yeah, California is big. SIP certified. Kim, I know you've seen this. It's sustainability in practice. It's more Central Coast California.
Hmm.
That's been around since in probably 2008 or so, and it has more to do with worker care and the environment. You'll see something that says SIP certified. There's another one called Lodi Rules. Are you familiar with this one, Kim?
No.
It's a Lodi, California. Sustainability and pesticide of environment is what they care about. So
Uh-huh.
if they're into that, they'll put that on the label.
Nice.
There's the live certification. I never knew what it meant, but it's the low input viticultural and enology certified,
That's
which
a
is
mouthful.
also Pacific Northwest. It's ecology based, supports the pest, natural predators. So if like an ecosystem, similar like biodynamic. So another thing you might see in the label. There's LEED certification, LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design.
Hmm.
Sustainability, environmental impacts on the winery, and it's actually big in the Finger Lakes. Did you see it when you were in the?
Yeah, there are a couple of wineries that are very big on using like geothermal power and solar power and wind power. So, yeah, this was something that I have noticed in the Finger Lakes that there are some of the wineries do make this concerted effort to be using these more renewable sources of energy.
They were the first to do it in New York. There's one in Napa called Napa Green. They call it the soil to bottle environment control. I've had a lot of Napa wines and I've never seen that on the label. Have you
Yeah,
seen
I'm
it?
not familiar with that one.
Yeah,
No.
it's
Hmm.
a big thing, but I've not seen it.
Maybe it's some of the smaller producers that we don't necessarily get all the way out here, but for their like own local market, it's a big deal. I don't know.
The big thing we always talk about is vegan. You see vegan certification, which we've talked about many times. Non-GMO, genetically modified wines. There's a few that were going around saying we don't genetically modify our wines. That was out there for a while. There was one Italian producer that was saying that all the time. Another New York one, Kim, the New York wine growers in Long Island have something called
Mm.
Vine Balance certification,
Hmm.
which I've never seen. B Corporation. I'm sure you've seen this one, Kim.
The
Or
honeybee
maybe
one.
no, B as in the letter B.
Oh, the letter B. Not
Yeah,
about
there
not
is a
about
B.
being for honeybees.
There is a B one, but this is the letter B. It's companies that this entire social environmental impact, and they're rated. And I heard it's very expensive
Hmm.
for them to get. So I've not seen it on many wines.
Wow.
There's an international environmental thing. They call it the ISO 14001 or 14004 certification. You may see that on a label. It's just these weird
There's a
things
lot
that,
of things out there.
yeah,
Yeah.
there were some other weird ones from other countries. I just want to hit a couple of them, Kim. I'm sure you've seen, and our listeners have probably seen, but New Zealand is huge on sustainable wine growing.
Hmm.
And they're saying nearly 100% of New Zealand vineyards are sustainable. And that you might see on the label, the certification is SWNZ. So Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand
Hmm.
is big. Chile's got their own certification. South Africa's got their own certification. Austria's got their own certification. Argentina has their own certification. So looking at labels from all over the world, you might see these little symbols on the back and wonder what they are, and you can look them up, and it all probably has to do with sustainability. You and I, Kim, both took the French Wine Scholar test,
Hmm.
and I was surprised. There were like 4 or 5 French certifications I'd never heard of that all had to do with the environment and biodynamics that were different. So you can see these different things on the labels as well. There was Terra Vitas. There was the HVE, which is environmental. There was the Fair and Green certification. There was the Biodyne wine.
Hmm.
And there was EcoCert,
Oh
which
yeah,
are all,
EcoCert's been around for a long time.
yeah, because there's like 130 countries in that one.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there are some big things out
Yeah.
there
But it
beyond
also
Salmon
shows that
Safe.
like things change over time too. So like in the however many years since we did our French wine scholar, there have been a lot more of these certifications for environmental measures that have just to show how much more emphasis is being placed on wineries and vineyards being much more respectful of the environment and really trying to make that effort to be good stewards of the land, really.
Yeah, it just, I keep thinking when people are presenting wines to me to sell to me, most of the time it's like, oh, they're organic or they're made with organic grapes. No one's really hitting these sustainable or any of these type of things. No one's
Mhm.
telling me, hey, by the way, it's a salmon safe vineyard.
Yep. But it's
So
an important thing for a lot of people, and especially as our younger generation of wine drinkers is sort of coming into its own, where the generations that are, a little bit younger than we are have much more of an awareness of wanting to spend their dollars on companies that do have this awareness and that do make the effort to make sure that they are doing right by the planet. That these things, I think, will have much more of an impact on the market depending on who the final consumer is. So I think that's a big part of it too.
yeah, it's always something.
It's always something. It keeps changing,
Yeah.
right?
And our listeners are probably saying, what the heck are these guys talking about today?
Yeah.
There's so much out there in the wine world we just find fascinating that we feel the listeners should know about, especially when you're picking up a label and everybody's so into looking at what is on there and trying to interpret it. It can be so overwhelming when you see all these things. What are these stamps on here? What does that
Mhm.
mean? So they do mean something, and they're very important to these wine growers and these producers that they take these measures and they want you to know it. And they're actually a very detailed websites on each of these certifications and what they do and who's involved with it. It'll tell you all the wineries that are doing it, what wines they make that have it on there. So if you're interested in trying any of these or finding something that's certified, just go to those sites and you can find a bottle. It's pretty easy to do.
Yep. And I know personally, I get a lot more inquiries from people about wines that fall into these more sustainable categories. So this is something that I think is front of mind for a lot of people and is a good thing to bring up when we are talking about trends in the wine world.
Thank you for joining us today on the wonderful world of wine. We've been your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. For more information about Kim, you can go to her website, commonwealthwineschool.com. For more information about myself, please go to franklinliquors.com. Our show is supported by Franklin Public Radio. You can find our past episodes on SoundCloud and iTunes. And you can find all our articles and past shows also on our Facebook page, The Wonderful World of Wine. Please send us any questions or comments you may have. Cheers.